Good morning and welcome to the Grim. I'm your host, Kristen. On today's episode, we'll be opening the gate and entering the Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument, located in Bighorn County, Montana. So grab your favorite mug, cozy up, and let's take a dig into history. The name Bighorn River is as infamous as it is iconic in the American West. Yet this river is not renowned for its scenic beauty or peaceful history, but for the tragic events that unfolded along its shores. Today it serves as more of a national monument. It's a hallowed graveyard honoring those who perished in the Battle of the Little Bighorn, or the Battle of the Greasy Grass. Famously remembered more as Custer's Last Stand, this pivotal conflict saw the combined forces of the Lakota Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes face off against the 7th Cavalry Regiment of the United States Army. In 1876, along the Little Bighorn River, due to the expansion of the Crow Indian Reservation in southeastern Montana Territory, a battle unfolded that would etch itself in the grim annals of history. Now spoken of in somber whispers, this clash culminated in the catastrophic defeat of U.S. forces, marking the bloodiest chapter of the Great Sioux War of 1876. But beneath the clash of warriors lies a darker tale of fractured alliances and contested lands. The Lakota, drawn to this place of conflict, were unwelcomed by the local Crow tribe, who held a treaty over the area with the U.S. government. As far back as 1873, Crow Chief Blackfoot had called upon the U.S. military to intervene against these unwelcome intruders. The Lakota's presence was born from a chain of misfortunes: displacement by the U.S. expansion, forced migrations near Fort Laramie, or the Trail of Tears, and the growing white incursion into the Black Hills, lands sacred to the Lakota. The shadow of discord had long loomed over these lands, where tribes clashed over territory as the U.S. deftly manipulated the simmering tensions. With the Araucas and the Crows aligning themselves with the U.S., the Battle of Little Bighorn transcended mere survival. It became a haunting stage for the eruption of emotion with spirits of displacement, betrayal, and the relentless tide of colonization. Even now, the winds that sweep across Little Bighorn carry the faint echoes of the fallen, their whispers a chilling reminder of the cost of America's manifest destiny. Yet who was the 7th Cavalry in this tale of loss and eventually becoming a dark chapter in military history? The 7th Cavalry emerged from the blood-soaked aftermath of the American Civil War in 1861 to 1865. Its ranks filled with battle-hardened men who carried the physical and emotional scars of that conflict. From its earliest days at Fort Riley, Kansas, the regiment was marked by death and misfortune. Skirmishes and major engagements claimed the lives of 36 men and left 27 wounded, but it was disease that truly stalked them. Cholera swept through their ranks, taking 51 lives, while 6 others drowned in the merciless rivers of the frontier. Death was an ever-present companion, looming over their every step like a relentless shadow. It seemed to stalk the regiment, an inescapable force trailing their every move. In November of 1868, the 7th Cavalry, under Custer's command, unleashed a brutal attack on Black Kettle's Southern Cheyenne camp at the Washita River. Though hailed by some as a military success, others condemned it as a massacre of innocent Indians. The air of blood and fire from the grim night seemed to cling to the regiment, shadowing their march to the infamous Battle of the Little Bighorn. Years later, in 1876, the regiment was fractured and weary. Half of its companies had been recalled from 18 months of grueling constabulary duty in the Deep South to Fort Abraham Lincoln in the Dakota Territory, hastily reassembled for the coming campaign. Among the 718 enlisted, nearly 20% were raw recruits, enlisted within the prior 7 months. These green soldiers, many with no combat or frontier experience, were joined by European immigrants, primarily Irish and German, who had fled one hardship only to face another in the harsh American wilderness. Archaeological findings paint a chilling picture. Many of the men were malnutritioned. Their physical conditions are far from battle ready, despite being part of the best equipped regiment in the Army. As the 7th Cavalry advanced toward the Little Bighorn, they carried with them a dangerous misconception. Based on flawed information from Indian agents, that only 800 hostiles awaited them. These numbers, while once accurate, had become gravely outdated. Unknown to the Army, thousands of reservation Indians, who had temporarily joined Sitting Bull's forces for a summer buffalo hunt, now swelled the ranks of the Lakota and the Cheyenne. What the Army thought to be a manageable confrontation had grown into an overwhelming force. Yet Custer and his commanders made their plans unaware they were walking into an inferno. Even as signs from the looming disaster emerged, Custer's confidence never wavered. His Crow scouts, experienced in the ways of the plains, warned him that the village ahead was the largest they had ever seen. But Custer dismissed their warnings, perhaps blindsided by ambition or unwilling to believe he was so outnumbered. The village stretched across the Little Bighorn River Valley, a seemingly endless sprawl of lodges and ponies. Scouts who had changed into their native dress, a foreboding sign they anticipated death, were released from duty, and Custer moved forward, underestimating the warriors hidden within the village's shadow. John Martin, Custer's bugler, and one of the last to see him alive, carried a desperate note for reinforcements as the battle unfolded. The village, which appeared quiet and unsuspecting from a distance, erupted into chaos as thousands of warriors emerged to meet Custer's 210 troopers. Custer's assumption that the warriors were unaware of his approach proved fatal. Fresh pony tracks and reports of Indian scouts observing the army's movements should have been enough to delay an attack, but Custer feared the village would disperse, forcing him to pursue fragmented bands across the wilderness. With the fear driving him, he chose to strike immediately. As rifle volleys echoed across the valley, calling for aid from Benton and Reno, the realization must have dawned on Custer too late. His men were hopelessly outnumbered. Testimonies later revealed that the volleys were heard as late as 4:30 p.m., but by then no help could reach them. The tide of warriors overwhelmed the 7th Cavalry, their sheer numbers sweeping across the battlefield like a flood. These events leading to that doomed attack remained steeped in eerie misjudgments and haunting missteps. Custer's final view of the massive village from the crow's nest was deceptive. What seemed peaceful at a glance was a sleeping giant waiting to awaken. The battle was over before it truly began, and the Little Bighorn became a graveyard for Custer and his men. The echoes of rifle fire, the cries of warriors, and the clash of steel lingering even today in the wind over this cursed valley, a chilling reminder of the arrogance and miscalculation that led to one of the most infamous massacres in American history. The soldiers were not only outnumbered, they were hopelessly outgunned. Recent archaeological findings, due to scattered shell casings littering the battlefield, tell a grim tale. The native warriors wielded repeating rifles, capable of rapid fire, while the 7th Cavalry relied on single-shot Springfield rifles, creating the perfect nightmare with thousands of warriors surging from the encampment like a storm, while the soldiers, outmatched and surrounded, struggled to reload after every single shot. Each pause to reload became a heartbeat closer to oblivion. It's also important to note that prior to their journey, Custer refused 4 additional companies of cavalry and 2 Gatling guns, leaning more into his arrogance and belief of superiority of his troops' force. Many believe the entire 7th Cavalry was wiped out that day, but this is a chilling misconception. Reno and Benton's companies fought elsewhere along the river, completely unaware of the horrors befalling the 200 men under Custer's command. They would not know the fate of their comrades until it was far too late. For Custer's 5 doomed companies, there were no survivors. The battle was almost over as soon as it began. One Crow chief chillingly remarked it was finished in about as long as it takes for a hungry man to eat his dinner. The swift and savage end of Custer's command left behind only silence, blood, and the ghostly echoes of a massacre that would shadow history forever. Custer's strategy at Little Bighorn carried ominous undertones, aimed not solely at engaging warriors, but at capturing women, children, and the elderly, vulnerable lives to be used as pawns. His plan was to strike terror in the hearts of the Sioux and the Cheyenne fighters, forcing their surrender by threatening their families. Historian Evan S. Connell described Custer's chilling logic. By seizing the encampment before resistance could fully form, the warriors would have no choice but to yield, unless they endangered their loved ones. This approach was not new for Custard. In his book My Life on the Plains, written 2 years earlier, he had outlined his belief that the proximity to women and children would disillude indigenous groups from fighting, their families' safety acting as a powerful argument in favor of peace. However, this time his gamble would prove tragically misguided. As the 7th Cavalry advanced, Custard's officers speculated on his movements. Lieutenant Edward Godfrey believed that Custard aimed to force non-combatants into chaotic flight, scattering the camp and leaving the warriors defenseless. Yet the Sioux and the Cheyenne were acutely aware of the threat to their families. When Captain Yates' companies approached the Medicine Tail Coulee, even the warriors engaged in the Reno Valley fight disengaged to defend the village. Hundreds surged back to protect the vulnerable, cutting off Custard's forces and sealing their fate. Some evidence suggests that Custard ventured further north with the Yates companies, attempting to cross the river near Fort D to strike at refugees fleeing from the encampment. Archaeological findings indicate he may have been within reach of women and children when resistance mounted. What began as a calculated maneuver to capture hostages turned into a desperate retreat. The fort abandoned, Custard's men fell back to what became known as Custard's Ridge, where they were surrounded and annihilated. Left behind after the Battle of Rosebud a week earlier, and housed the body of an old she-bear, a Sanzark warrior who had succumbed to his wounds. The teepee marked the place where Custard gave Reno his final orders to attack, setting in motion the fateful events of the battle. Survivors later used this eerie structure as a reference point, its presence a reminder of death and displacement haunting these lands. As the dust settled over Little Bighorn, the fields lay silent but the whispers of the wind and the weight of the lives lost. Custer's plan, steeped in grim calculation, unraveled into chaos. The warriors defended their families with unyielding resolve, leaving the 7th Cavalry to face the full force of their fury, understandably and within right. Today, the lone teepee and the bluffs of Custard's Ridge stand as spectral witnesses to the ill-fated gamble and chilling legacy. When Custard made his fight, the first strike at the Battle of Little Bighorn came under ominous cloud of miscalculation and chaos. Major Reno's detachment, Companies A, G, and M, charged forward at Custard's orders, penned by Lieutenant William W. Cook, based on reports that Sioux scouts were alerting the massive encampment. Ordered to bring them to battle, Reno crossed the Little Bighorn River near what is now known as Reno Creek around 3 p.m. on June 25th. But as they advanced, the soldiers quickly realized the Lakota and the Northern Cheyenne were not fleeing. They were waiting in full force. The eerie shrouds of trees along the southern bank masked the size of the encampment, hiding its sheer scale until Reno's men were nearly upon it. As they broke into the open field, the sight of the sprawling village struck like a revelation. The Arapaho Sioux teepees loomed ahead, their occupants far more numerous and prepared than Reno had expected. Sensing the trap, Reno abruptly halted his advance and ordered his men into a skirmish line, a formation that diminished their firepower and left them exposed. The ominous quiet shattered as the Lakota warriors surged from the village, their war cries filling the air. Reno's line faltered at the left flank, collapsing under an onslaught of more than 500 warriors. Forced into the cover of the timber along the river bend, Reno and his men faced relentless attacks. The warriors, determined to drive them out, set fire to the brush, smoke curling like ghostly fingers toward the panicked soldiers. Among the chaos, a Kari scout bloodied knife was shot in the head. His blood and brains scattered across Reno's face. Shaken and disoriented, Reno gave the order to retreat, abandoning the wounded to a grisly fate. As his men scrambled to escape, they were relentlessly pursued by the Cheyenne, who picked off the stragglers in close combat. Horses stumbled and fell down a steep riverbank as warriors pulled soldiers from their mounts, ending their lives with clubs and tomahawks. Atop Reno Hill, the shattered remnants of his force were soon joined by Captain Benedict's column and the pack train. Together, the surviving 340 troopers dug into the hard ground with knives and improvising tools, desperate to create defenses. Heavy gunfire echoed from the north, but Reno refused to move. Even as his men heard the eerie volleys signaling Custer's desperate fight, the horizon burned with dust and smoke, obscuring what lay ahead. But Captain Weir, through his spyglass, saw a horrifying sight. The massive Indian encampment stretched before him, with riders swarming and shooting at fallen bodies at what would become known as Last Stand Hill. Let's take a quick break. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
You like weird stories? You like bizarre accounts? You like horror movies?
Come on down to Pumpkin Hill Radio for all your paranormal, metaphysical, and high strangeness needs. Every Tuesday with host Travis, that's me, and Dawson.
It's me. You ever seen something you can't explain? You ever felt something you can't explain?
Do you have questions that nobody can answer?
You heard a story that made you feel completely mad?
Do you feel like you shouldn't Google what you just saw?
Have you tried to Google it and gotten nothing?
We might be able to help.
We're looking for it.
That's every Tuesday with host Travis and Dawson, Pumpkin Hill Radio. Come on down.
PHR, baby.
Pumpkin Hill Radio, available on all platforms. Anything else to say?
We'll see you there. Give it a follow. Tell your friends.
As night fell, the soldiers remained pinned on the bluff, surrounded by warriors who performed war dances in the firelight, their shadows flickering like specters of doom. Sporadic gunfire continued, and even the earth itself seemed to tremble under the weight of the battle's fury. By dawn, the silence was almost deafening, but the horrors of Little Bighorn were far from over. The tale of Custer's fight at the Battle of Little Bighorn is a haunting enigma, shrouded in uncertainty and death. The final moments of Custer and his battalion remain largely a mystery, as none of the 210 men under his immediate command survived to tell the tale. What remains are fragments of oral histories from the Lakota and the Cheyenne, and chilling evidence left behind on the battlefield. Gunfire heard by Reno and Bentin's men on the bluffs of June 25, 1876, was likely the dying echoes of Custer's desperate last stand. Unaware of his fate until General Terry's arrival 2 days later, the soldiers were reportedly stunned to learn that Custer's forces had been utterly annihilated 3.5 miles away. When the army finally reached the site, they were greeted by a grim scene. Bodies stripped of clothing, mutilated in ritualistic defiance, and scattered across the battlefield. Even Custer himself, found on a hill later dubbed Last Stand Hill, bore 2 gunshot wounds, one to the chest and another to the temple. While some accounts suggest these wounds were inflicted post-mortem, others whispered of Custer's suicide to escape capture, a grim possibility that adds to the dark aura surrounding the event. The eerie chaos of the battle site told its own macabre story. Dead horses, used as makeshift barricades, marked the places where soldiers made their final stands. Scattered shell casings and disturbed earth hinted at frantic skirmishes and doomed attempts to hold positions. Lakota and Cheyenne warriors later recounted how Custer's men were overwhelmed in waves, the resistance collapsing into disorder and death. Some soldiers reportedly threw down their weapons in futile attempt to flee, only to meet their end under clubs and lances of their pursuers. Cheyenne oral tradition holds that Buffalo Calf Road women delivered the fateful blow that knocked Custer from his horse, while other accounts suggest that sharpshooters along the river sealed his doom. What is clear is that the battlefield became a stage for chaos, with warriors swarming the outnumbered cavalry in what described as a buffalo run of a relentless destruction. The aftermath was no less chilling. Bodies were hastily buried where they fell, shallow graves offering scant protection against time and the elements. Markers were later replaced to memorialize the dead, but the ground still holds secrets, with some remains never recovered and others lost to erosion in time. Archaeological evidence suggests that the final moments of Custer's battalion were a desperate retreat, with soldiers falling in small clusters as they were picked off one by one. The eerie silence of the battlefield today belies the carnage that once unfolded there. The Last Stand Hill, with its weathered markers and solemn obelisk, stand as a grim reminder of the lives lost and the mysteries that remain. The ghosts of the 7th Cavalry linger in the whispers of the wind, and their stories forever etched into the haunting soil of Little Bighorn. The Battle of Little Bighorn remains one of the most haunting and infamous clashes in American history, a devastating and overwhelming victory for the Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes. Guided by the visions of Sitting Bull and led by the indomitable Crazy Horse and Chief Gall, their forces overwhelmed the U.S. 7th Cavalry, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. The 700-strong cavalry met its doom on the windswept plains. 5 of its 12 companies were annihilated, with Custer himself falling alongside 2 of his brothers, a nephew, and his brother-in-law. The death toll was staggering: 268 dead and 55 gravely wounded, including 6 who later succumbed to their injuries. Among the fallen were 4 Crow and at least 2 Akari scouts, guides who knew these lands all too well but still could not escape their fate. In the eerie silence that followed, the public's reaction to this blood-soaked chapter of the Great Sioux War was deeply divided. Custer's widow, Libby Custer, set to work immortalizing her husband as a tragic hero, painting the battlefield as a site of his valiant stand. For decades, this narrative loomed large, with Custer hailed as a martyr of American expansion. Yet as the decades wore on, cracks appeared in the story. By the 1930s, the aura of heroism began to fade. Libby's death in 1933 and the release of Glory Hunter, The Life of General Custer by Frederick F. Van de Walter, exposed a more complex, flawed figure. Cynicism born from the Great Depression and the rise of historical revisionism gave way to the darker, more jaded view of Custer's legacy, a man driven by ambition to a fateful, fiery end on the desolate banks of the Little Bighorn. The fallout from the battle sent shockwaves through the nation. News of Custer's massacre reached the east like a ghostly specter during the country's centennial celebrations. The steamboat Far West, transformed into a floating field hospital, carried the wounded along with the story of the defeat, which spread with unsettling speed, igniting a maelstrom of sorrow, outrage, and legend building. The battlefield itself became a spectral site of unanswered questions and lingering spirits. The Army, hampered by both the need for survivors and the preservation of reputations, began a controversial investigation. Meanwhile, Custer's widow Elizabeth fiercely protected her husband's image, casting him as a gallant hero even as a darker truth emerged. For the Native forces, the Battle of Little Bighorn marked both a triumphant and a forewarning. The victory fractured their unity as scarcity of game and grass forced their great encampment to disperse. Oglala Sioux Black Elk recounted the haunting exodus, families fleeing under cover of night, their lives forever altered by the specter of vengeance looming on the horizon. The aftermath was no less ghostly. The once celebratory warriors returned to the reservations, their numbers dwindling as the relentless machinery of the U.S. Army resumed its campaign. By May 1877, the resistance of figures like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse was crushed, and the Great Sioux War came to a harrowing close. The land of the heart of the conflict, the Black Hills, remained steeped in contention. Seated under the shadow of starvation, the Sioux never relinquished their spiritual claim, refusing the monetary compensation offered for their sacred lands. To this day, the Black Hills stand as a testament to the grim chapter of betrayal, loss, and enduring defiance, an eternal battleground where history refuses to rest. The site of the Battle of Little Bighorn, steeped in blood and tragedy, is often described as one of the most haunting battlefields of America. Visitors have long reported chilling encounters with ghostly soldiers and Native American warriors, as well as unsettling sounds that seem to echo the chaos of that fateful day. The spectral figures of soldiers and warriors, clad in full battle gear, have been seen wandering the battlefield. These apparitions are most frequently reported near Last Stand Hill, where Custer and his men made their doomed final stand against overwhelming forces. Some visitors claim to experience vivid and harrowing visions of the battle itself. They report seeing phantoms engaged in combat, hearing the clash of weapons and the shouts of war cries, and even feeling the oppressive chaos of the fight as if reliving it in real time. A historic stone house near the battlefield has gained a notorious reputation for its paranormal activity. Visitors have described seeing eerie lights, hearing disembodied voices, and encountering a chilling apparition of a headless cavalryman within its walls. The battlefield is alive with ghostly echoes of the past. Reports include disembodied screams, crack of gunfire, and cries of anguish. These haunting sounds, some believe, are residual echoes of the ferocious battle that unfolded on these grounds. The Little Bighorn remains not only a historical landmark, but also a place where the veil between the past and the present seem dangerously thin, drawing both history enthusiasts and seekers of the supernatural to its hills. Today, the Little Battlefield National Monument is more than a place of remembrance. It's a chilling reminder of lives violently cut short. Here where winds whisper through the unyielding grass and the ghosts of the past linger, the monument honors both the Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and the Arapaho warriors who defended their way of life, and the soldiers who perished in the losing fight. The spirits of those who clashed on this fateful field seem to echo still, forever bound to haunting the legacy of this storied land. The Sioux Nations have long asserted their rightful claim to the Black Hills, a sacred land intertwined with their heritage and identity. This contention is deeply connected to the events surrounding the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876, where their forces, along with the Northern Cheyenne and the Arapaho, achieved a decisive victory against the U.S. 7th Cavalry. The triumph underscored their determination to defend their land and way of life. However, their resistance could not halt the relentless tide of the U.S. expansion. In 1980, the U.S. Supreme Court acknowledged that the Black Hills have been wrongfully seized, a violation of treaties made with the Sioux. To address the historical injustice, a trust account was established with $102 million in compensation. Despite the monetary offer, the Sioux have consistently refused to accept it, holding steadfast to their belief that no amount of money can replace their sacred lands. To the haunting legacy of the Black Hills and the Battle of Little Bighorn endures as a powerful reminder of the cost of conquest and the enduring struggle for justice. The grave grind for Little Bighorn National Monument was an espresso from well-known Buffalo Coffee House and Gifts. For more honorary grinds in the area, please visit the-grim.com. For now, we're closing the gate on the Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument. We hope you enjoyed our dig into history. If you did, subscribe today to join us next time when we open the gate on the Grim.